Today we're going to talk about the corresponding error to observable truth, irrationality. Irrationality, I think, is the flip side to observable truth. At least it is for this sermon series, and here's why. With observable truth, we observe things that happen, and we want to know why, right? So we want to know how. So we do the hard work. We do that scientific work or that rational work, and then at the end, we get rewarded with the feeling of knowing. Irrationality lets us skip past all that hard work and just enjoy that good old feeling of knowing. You know, you just get to repeat what you heard and sounded right. Boom! Feeling of knowing. It keeps us, irrationality, it keeps us from understanding the truth through a simple kind of fact about us. We would rather feel right than be right. Every time, we'd rather feel right than be right. You know, sometimes we have trouble telling the difference between the two. We didn't know there was a difference sometimes. That's because of a whole host of little shortcuts that we often take to get to that good old feeling of certainty. There's thousands of these little biases, and fallacies. I encourage you to look them up. They're great. You'll see, you won't see yourself, but you'll see people you know in them. And today we're going to start by looking at one you've all probably heard of, confirmation bias. Everybody heard this word? Yeah, confirmation bias. This is the name for our tendency to look for proof that we're right. And as soon as we find some, we stop looking. Or, you know, we might keep looking, but we're going to ignore anything that doesn't seem to support the fact that we're right. And we just collect the ones that support what we already believe. We do it with people, too. You know, if you can find one person who agrees with you, your feeling of certainty starts to get kind of warm and tingly. If you can find 100, that's all the proof you'll ever need. Now, unlearning this bias, unlearning confirmation bias, which is kind of hardwired into us, it's hard. It's counterintuitive because it's built in to the hardware of our brains. The part that we reason with, you know, you talk about the frontal cortex, it's not really a reasoning machine. It can work like one, but it's not really what it is. It's really a cooperation machine. It was formed to resolve the problems posed by living in a small cooperative group. You know, think about cave people working together to survive. You want to stay in the group. You don't want to get kicked out. The easiest thing to do would be a freeloader, right? But if you're a freeloader, then you get kicked out. It's a complicated dance that we do to be in a cooperative group. Y'all are doing a great job at that, by the way. So that reasoning part of our brain, the part that we use to solve logical problems and to draw conclusions from unfamiliar data, it was developed for social reasons. It just so happens it can also be used for all the things we have to use it for today. You know, eradicating disease, going into space, building and using computers. But then look what we do with computers, right? We use them to connect with other people. We're social creatures. A lot of our problems come from the fact that we are all living in a technological world in caveman bodies with caveman brains. It's also a problem with our health, too. But that's a subject for another time. Our need to have social support is very real. But especially today, it's also very easy to hack, to manipulate, to get you to to say and do things you otherwise wouldn't do because you feel that social support. But thankfully, God has given us a word to go on. Lots of words to go on, but one I was led to really specifically this week for this subject. Our scripture passage today is Ephesians 5, verses 6 through 14. You can read along in your pew Bibles. That's what will be up here on the screen, is the NRSV. Ephesians is one of my favorite books of the Bible. The Apostle Paul brought the faith to the city of Ephesus and taught there for 3 years. It's a long stint for the Apostle Paul, and he established a church that was so successful, it was so successful that the idol manufacturers rioted because their business suffered so much. Boy, wouldn't that be cool? I'd love to see, let's who should we get to riot? Payday lenders, wouldn't that be great if we could do that? Anyway, so then later, as Paul waited for his trial in a Roman prison, he wrote this letter, we call Ephesians, to all the churches there since they had grown in his absence. Now, the few verses we're going to look at today spoke to the first hearers of their particular situation, which had to do with idols and pagans and all that stuff. But it spoke to me this week about ours, and I hope it speaks to you too. I think it speaks to our situation with this subject. It starts out like this. It says, "Let no one deceive you with empty words." Let no one deceive you with empty words. I see in this verse it kind of puts some of that burden on you, on me. Let no one deceive you. It's like you're a participant in being deceived. It's like you're getting something out of it by being deceived. Maybe not always, but sometimes. Being deceived is not just something that is done to you, it's something that you allow to happen. For whatever reason, each of us has something that we want to hear. You'll have kind of your pet subjects, you perk up. People you love, there's something, if the conversation flags, and you can bring that up and they'll perk back up. We all have something we want to hear. Maybe it's because it's what we heard growing up, or maybe it plays on our emotions. Maybe it just gets us angry. People can just press that anger button over and over again, and it works. Press that fear button over and over again, and it works. Gets you to do and believe anything if they press that button. And when they do, we don't notice or maybe care that the words they're using are empty. And when I say empty, I mean irrational. They're using bad logic, bad reasoning. Social scientists have done all kinds of experiments. They're really great to read about to demonstrate a lot of these empty words, the ways that we can be easily tricked. One for instance, they found that people tend to believe statements that rhyme more than those that don't. I can prove it. Ready? If the glove does not fit, 30 years old. That's not true. But it sticks. Rhymes stick in our brains, and they feel truer. When they rhyme, when we can remember them, what happens? We feel included. We feel like we're a part of something. And it feels true. So we like things that make us feel included, make us feel smart, make us feel a part of the group, and we don't like things that make us not feel that way. That's where this next thing comes from. Whataboutism. You probably heard this term over the last few years. Whataboutism, whataboutery. It's a term for this irrational tendency we all have to bring up another topic whenever you're challenged on a belief or something you did. Someone says, you left your socks on the floor. And you say, you didn't empty the dishwasher, right? Doesn't change the fact that, you left your socks on the floor. We do it in politics mostly, but not us, other people. But it's an attempt to discredit an opponent's position by charging them with hypocrisy without directly addressing what they just said. You don't have to refute it. You don't have to disprove it. You just have to make them look bad. So if an irrational person feels criticized, they will very likely try to point out that someone else is worse. It's the kind of thing that you need to, as Paul said, not let yourself be deceived by, not take the bait with, not get caught up in that pattern, because when someone's doing it on your side, you give them a pass, right? It's just fine. You don't care if your team cheats, you just notice when the other team cheats. But when we do that, we're an active participant in being deceived. So, verse 6 goes on, it says, "Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes on those who are disobedient." That's kind of a big statement. The wrath of God on words, for words. We usually think about the wrath of God for actions, for the big bads, but careless words, deceiving words, empty words, not just the ones using them to deceive, but the one being deceived by them, an active participant, the wrath of God coming. We let ourselves believe something that wasn't true because it made life simpler or easier. It stuck with something we already believed. The wrath of God. So when this happens, Paul says, therefore, do not be associated with them. Do not be associated with them. You see, being associated, that's where we find our feelings of certainty, from our associations. It's a very particular kind of relationship. Other translations of this verse say, don't be partnered. It's really, I think, that for them then it applied to their neighbors who were pagans and all that, but it applies for this as well. See, if we're partnered with someone or some cause or some organization, we tend to give them a pass for any irrational thing they say or do. They get challenged, we participate in the whataboutism. That's why it's so important to be careful about our associations. Because once we've let someone in, we'll just keep believing them. There's actually a bias called the Ben Franklin effect. It says if you get someone to do a favor for you, they're more likely to like you and do favors for you than if you do a favor for them. We're more motivated by someone nice being done for us than by an obligation. And that's what these associations do for us. They make us feel included. You've done something for me, so now I want to reciprocate, do something back for you. So we have to be careful about our associations. Irrationality is a lot like sin, especially the way we Presbyterians think and believe about sin. We're born in it. We'll always have it to struggle with. We don't get to be free from it. If you want that, Methodist Church is next door. But that's a theology joke. I shouldn't put those in. They're so dry. When we deny that sin is there, that's when it has the most power in our lives. Staying associated with those who are irrational and thinking that we can do it and not catch it is hubris. It's pride. We can't do it. Of course it'll affect you. Just like with sin, the best we can hope to do with our built-in irrationality is manage it, work around it. All right, next verse, verse 8. For once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right, and true. Once you were darkness, and now you are light. Stop associating with the darkness. I know that some of you here, you listen to the same thing all day, every day. You watch the same thing all day, every day. It affects you. It changes the way you believe, the way you think about other people. You can tell because everyone who listens to the same thing and watches the same thing all day, every day, they all say the same things every time. You can't do that. Once you were darkness, but now you're light. You can't listen to the darkness all day. It'll get in. It'll change who you are. You may have already done it, and you can come back, but you have to stop. Irrationality is contagious, and it spreads through our social circles, through who we feel like is on our side. Once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light. Look for all that is good. The fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. See, we don't ever have anything to fear from the truth. Not just what we want to feel is the truth, but the real truth, no matter where it leads us. But how do we find it? How do we find it? Well, the next verse kind of tells us. It says, try to find out. Try to find out what is pleasing to the Lord. Try, as in it takes work. It's not just the first thing that sounds good. It takes work. We don't just go with what feels right. We have to try to find out. One of the weird things about working around our irrationality is that it's counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive. It's the opposite of what you'd normally think to do. Sometimes you have to do the opposite of your instincts. Like the way around confirmation bias is to try to prove yourself wrong. Try to prove yourself wrong. Look for the evidence that you're wrong. Follow it out. It's a great thought exercise. Whatever your belief or your position, instead of looking for ways that you must be right, try to see it from the other side. How might you be wrong? Try to prove it. Try really hard. It might turn out that you're right, and then your argument will be much, much better if you understand all the arguments against your own position. But that's not the point. The point is to find the truth. But it's hard in our social morass that we're in. Verse 11 talks about that difficulty. It says, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. Then verse 12 says, for it is shameful even to mention what such people do secretly. How can you expose something while not mentioning it? I mean, the surface level, I just hear from this, especially from verse 11, don't fight fire with fire. It's not justified because they do it too. It may seem urgent. It might seem like it warrants a shortcut. It might seem like the stakes are so high, but they've always been so high. But it's not worth it. Take no part in their shenanigans, but instead expose them. And verse 12, since it says, some things are not worth mentioning, we don't expose them by pointing them out necessarily, because we all know how well that goes, right? We expose them by showing what the alternative is. It's not something we see a lot, but I think we could do it. I think our church could do it. For the Ephesian church, they were called to expose, sinful idolatry just by living righteous lives of worship. We're called to do that too, but also when it comes to exposing the irrationality we see all around us, maybe it would be better if we just showed whoever it is what the possibilities are. What if we lived and reasoned differently? What if that was like a ministry of our church? What if here we had conversations and discussions that you would never see on TV? What if we liked it? What if we started to think that way? That would be different. That could help. This last verse is kind of a mystery, but also the whole reason this passage spoke to me. If you want to confront your own irrationality and sin for that reason, this is how you do it. Verses 13 and 14 say, "But everything exposed by the light becomes visible. For everything that becomes visible is light." It's beautiful, isn't it? I'll cross-stitch that on a pillow. That's a good verse. That's a mystery. It's a thinker. What does it mean? Well, it means a lot more than we'll get into it today. But for us today, I think it means that God wants us to notice anything in ourselves that isn't right. Just notice it. We don't have to resolve to never, ever do that again. We don't have to beat ourselves up with guilt. We just have to notice. Notice when we do something wrong, take a shortcut. And in particular, with irrationality. Notice our confirmation bias. Notice every time we have the instinct to say, "But what about?" You see, it's not about being right. It's not about feeling right. Right is not a status. It's not an identity. The goal isn't to be right, it's to become less wrong. And when you find something wrong, you expose the light and you just take it out. And it's like when you go to the doctor. They don't know what you have, they just can tell you what you don't have. Less wrong, less wrong, piece by piece. To notice those things in you that are wrong and let God's light shine on them. And that's all it takes. Well, this week, I'd love, if you have the time, read up on cognitive biases. Learn to recognize them. They're fun to read about. You'll notice them in other people, but try to look at them for yourself. Look at what you need to shine that light on. Look for when you have said, "Oops." Remember the times that you were flabbergasted and said, "But I wore the juice." Be honest about it. That's, I think, maybe how we can help others. Can't change it all at once, but maybe if we're those kinds of people. Then maybe, if we do that work, then maybe you can ask the people in your life when they say something that you know isn't right. You can ask them, "Did you make sure that was true?" And they'll see in your life that you're someone who does that too. Maybe they'll listen.